This is just this is a clinical recommendation from my experience working with patients. I'm not representing the scientific literature here. I'm not trying to make arguments about.
But we're talking about nutrition. That's
safe.
madness. That's absolute madness to come up with your own definitions. And this is what I feel that Chris does. Okay, and when you have people like Chris on multiple times, it throws people's perception off as what is a healthy diet, because Chris misrepresents the data. He comes up with his own definitions of things. He misrepresents things that we said in the film.
So I'm sure you guys have seen, if not heard, of the Game Changers debate that was on the Joe Rogan podcast between James Lightning Wilks, the producer of the Game Changers, and Chris Kresser. I'm gonna tell my kids this was Rocky versus Drago. It was a 4-hour long episode. I've watched it once on YouTube, listened to it once on the podcast driving in the car. So initially how it all started out was the Game Changers had a lot of attention, a lot of responses, and then there was even a freaking documentary that was made about the Game Changers. It's so cringy. And then Joe Rogan invited Chris Kresser onto the podcast by himself to critique the Game Changers film, which I don't understand why you wouldn't have James Lightning Wilks on the podcast from the beginning. Like, why did you even record that? To be fair, I thought Joe was very open-minded about the things that James had to say. I was surprised that the episode was not sponsored by ButcherBox. But Joe was very open-minded, and he's even considering taking down the initial critique of the Game Changers. He said he learned a lot from James, and he's considering a lot of the information that he talked about. And like any fighter, he was not gonna go easy. He was ready to put up a fight, and James going into this was well prepared. He said that he's had over 1,000 or 2,000 hours of researching and learning about nutrition, which is insane. James wrote down the exact things that Chris said in the critique and would bring them up in quotes. And he basically debunked every single thing that came out of Chris's mouth. And James even wanted to go longer, like the 4 hours wasn't enough. He wanted to keep on going. So I wrote a bunch of notes down here. I'm not gonna talk about the whole episode. I'll link it down below. You guys should totally watch it. Dedicate some time out of your day. Listen to it, be open-minded, go into this and listen to what both parties have to say. Chris Kresser said that the Game Changers claimed that cigarettes were as bad as eating meat. James came on Joe Rogan podcast and stated that we were not saying that cigarettes were as bad as eating meat. That's not what we were trying to do in the film. We were trying to portray the same playbook that is going on. In other words, that cigarettes were once considered healthy, and that industry influence swayed consumers, and that the same thing is going on with meat, and how many of the studies out there that are claiming that meat is healthy, meat should be part of a healthy diet, they're more than likely industry funded studies, and that's what he was trying to do with that. Some other things that they talked about in the debate was, can you get enough protein as a vegan? Can you get quality protein as a vegan? James explained how heme iron is inflammatory. They talked about dairy. And they also talked about B12. And actually, speaking of B12, Chris, in the original critique video of the Game Changers, one of his arguments was that James did not cite a resource when James said that animals that are being raised for meat are supplemented with B12 because they are not getting quality food in those feedlots. So then James came onto the podcast, onto the debate, to say that one, I did actually use a study, and two, I used the same study in one of your ebooks when you talked about B12. Actually, Jamie, can you find that clip? Can we roll that real quick?
I'm on a track here because he got two things wrong. So
I agree with you on this, because his statement is essentially saying that the reason why we don't get it today is because of
we sanitize and we pesticides.
Yes.
So your third point, I said this, you took issue with my claim. Okay. And up to 39% of people tested, including meat eaters, are low in B12. As a result, the best way for humans to get enough B12, whether they eat animal foods or not, is simply take a supplement. Then you said he didn't provide a reference for that, so it's hard to check. But again, it contradicts, mounds of evidence on B12 efficiency. So can you bring up slide 50, please, Jamie? You said that I didn't provide a reference, okay? But in the bottom left, where we put all of the references whenever I made a claim about the scientific research. First of all, there's the reference. You claimed you didn't have a reference. Would you admit that you were wrong?
I missed that.
Okay, 3 times wrong about B12. Okay, so can we just go into your study, your ebook on B12? You basically said, I don't know where you got that study from. Your B12 ebook opens with the exact same study. So can you put up slide 51, please, Jamie? Okay, is that your ebook on the left?
Yes.
Okay. You rounded up to 40, but I kept it at 39, okay? Because I was being specific. B12 deficiency is far more common than most healthcare practitioners and the general public realize. Data from the Tufts University Framingham Offspring Study suggests that 40% of people between the ages of 26 and 83 have plasma B12 levels in the low normal range, a range at which many experience neurological symptoms. That was the opening statement of your B12 ebook, and you claimed that where you couldn't find the evidence of that study.
No disagreement that B12 deficiency is an issue. I talked about that on my website.
Yeah, that's not what you said on the last time you were on Joe's podcast. You said, I don't know, he didn't provide a reference for that, so it's hard to reject, but it contradicts the evidence. If that's not reflective of the preponderance of evidence, why did you open your ebook with it?
It's not... Okay, so there's 2 different issues here. One is, do omnivores get B12 deficiency?
Right, do they?
Yes, they do.
Okay, and 40% of people tested.
In this study...
Which is the one that you referenced.
That's right. And there are many... I'm not saying the study is bad.
But you
I'm
said
just
that
saying, let's look at all of the other...
You said that I didn't provide a reference, but do you write your own ebooks, by the way?
I do.
And you don't remember that study?
No.
Yeah, can you believe that? I mean, it's the exact same study that James was talking about, and Chris used it in his own ebook. However, he could not recall that study when James was making his point. Honestly, how do you not remember that same study that you used for your own ebook? And James also pointed out that Chris was actually making his own numbers, his own macronutrient ratios when it came to the definition of a low carb and high carb diet. But when you're talking about nutrition, something that's based off of science, how can these numbers just pop out of nowhere? You know what I mean? It's sketchy. When people who are relying on you to learn about nutrition education come to you for that, and they're putting their faith in you, they should be able to get the science. And yeah, I get it. It's not an easy thing to do. I mean, there's so much stuff out there. It's hard to kind of go through it all and to find what's genuine and what's industry funded and what's flawed and what is biased, and there's a bunch of noise out there is what I'm trying to say. And without bad intentions, you can still be misled with all the data out there. But to make up your own macronutrient ratios that's not based on science, what is that? And James constantly pointed out throughout the whole episode, he was stating, you know, I am not a nutrition expert. I am just a combative fighter. Yet how can you have someone like Chris Kresser come onto the show, a show which has about 7 million subscribers, probably more than that with the podcast itself, of people listening and tuning in to learn something, and you have somebody on who doesn't know the studies, who doesn't know the science, and possibly misleading the public, whether it's intentionally or not. That's why I was so confused, like why are you having Chris Kresser on without James? Like, I know Joe's intentions were to get James onto the podcast. He even said it in the original critique video, but why not just have him on from the start? But I don't want you guys to take my word for it. I want you guys to watch the whole debate after watching this video if you haven't seen it already. But one thing I want you guys to get out of this is that industry plays a huge role when it comes to influencing information. Industry sways consumers. It plays a very big role into the information that you get. A lot of the studies are industry funded, and an industry is not going to put out something that says what they do or the products that they make are bad for you. They will not do that, and that is a conflict of interest. And that may not be the best resource to use when you want to learn something about nutrition. So Jamie, see if you can find that clip of James explaining this very topic that we were just talking about. Can you go ahead and pull that up? Pull that up, Jamie? Jamie?
So in the Annals of Internal Medicine, the day before the film came out, 6 studies exonerating red meat and processed meat, all from the same company that are apparently giving recommendations. Well, guess what? Exponent and Nutrarex and companies like that are not the ones that give public recommendations on what people should be eating, number one. Okay? And we talked about this in the film with Exponent. Nutrarex is like another Exponent. So if you look at their recommendations, first of all, Frank Hu, who is now the chair of nutrition at Harvard, he took Walt Willett's place, said the panel's blanket recommendations that adults should continue to their red meat consumption habits is highly irresponsible. Walter Willett said it's the most egregious abuse of data he's ever seen. And if you want to follow their recommendations, if you could put up slide 92. So they did the same thing in 2017 for the sugar industry. So there was a meta-analysis in the Annals of Internal...
When you say they, you mean the exact same company,
So Bradley Johnston is the director and co-founder of Nutrarex and the first author of the paper that we're talking about for red meat, okay? That just exonerated red meat, apparently, and processed meat.
So this is the same company says at present there seems to be no reliable evidence indicating that any of the recommended daily caloric thresholds for sugar intake are strongly associated with negative health effects.
So they did a meta-analysis saying that don't worry about your intake of sugar at all. That was what their meta-analysis conclusion it came to. And then 2 years later, the day before the film came out, and do you really think that's a coincidence? Do you think that So let me tell you something, okay? Of our email subscribers, do you know the email address of the person that opens and views our emails the most? It's from the Beef Checkoff program. And they've been doing that since we started. So they sign up for our mailing list, they look at when the film is coming out, and you think it's a coincidence that the day before our film comes out, they release a paper exonerating red meat and cancer. And the same study. So if you're going to buy into the Nutrarex study about red meat and cancer, then to be fair, you've also got to buy into their conclusions about sugar. Because they were paid. I'll tell you who they were paid by. Okay. So, so financial support for that paper was funded by the technical, now listen to this, sounds great. The Technical Committee on Dietary Carbohydrates of ILSI North America. And ISI is the International Life Sciences Institute. Sounds pretty legit, right? So its members include Coca-Cola, Hershey Company, Pepsi Company, and Red Bull, and a bunch of others.
Folks looking out for your best interests.
There you go. Okay.
Yeah.
And by the way, there's an investigation into the Annals of Internal Medicine because of this, for accepting this stuff from Nutrarex. But if you're going to accept the meta-analysis on red meat and on processed meat for cancer, then you've also got to accept the 2017 study meta-analysis.
If you accept the source. If you accept the source.
They're both the same. It's the same Nutrarex.
If that was the only meta-analysis that showed no association between red meat and heart disease or cancer, that would be highly problematic.
I'm talking about the one. I'm talking about the one that you cited. You made out that this is like, okay. Second of all, I have pointed out that industry-funded research is 4 to 8 times more likely, right?
Yeah, I agree.
To do. And going back to that dairy one, by the way, do you know that when they did their meta-analysis, they doubled and tripled and quadrupled up because when the meta-analysis that analyzed the meta-analyses, the multiple meta-analyses, included the studies multiple times. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because they took it into account each time. And so when the industry floods the scientific research with their funded studies, again, if they fund a study, it doesn't turn out.
They're studying other studies and coming to the same conclusion and adding those on as if it's an additional study. Is that what you're saying?
No, it's so. Look, if your industry funds studies and it only decide, if you're a beef industry or a dairy industry, are you going to put out studies that aren't in your favor? No, right?
No.
And you also
they don't have to.
You spin it, and so what you do is if you want to make beef look, if you want to make saturated fat look okay, or if you want to make cholesterol okay, you can switch things around the study to make it look good. If you want to look at eggs, and for example, and I don't want to get it could turn into a 3-hour debate about cholesterol and saturated fat, but if you go from 10 eggs a week to 12 eggs a week, it doesn't raise your serum cholesterol. So that's how they did the study. But if you go from no eggs a week to 1 egg a week, it does increase your, because there's something called the cholesterol plateau. So what the industry does is it tricks you. It was done with tobacco. And again, I'm not comparing the amount of increased risk of cancer from tobacco. That was never a claim that was made. It was the playbook that is used by the drug industry, by the meat industry, by the sugar, industry, by the dairy industry. You are the one that quoted this study. It shows that your finger's not on the pulse because hundreds of like top scientists have written letters or joined in the same letter to the Annals of Internal Medicine asking for those studies to be retracted. And there's now an investigation into the Annals of Internal Medicine, yet you are citing that study.
An investigation doesn't prove, nothing has been proven.
It doesn't prove anything,
yet,
but it shows.
I was aware of that controversy. And
you can't even read forest plots, but you're telling people what to eat.
The controversy is not surprising if red meat has been demonized for as long as it has been, and then a study comes out which exonerates it. It would be entirely expected that there would be controversy.
So, and do you know who that study was funded by? Can you just pick up slide 93?
Scientists who discredited meat guidelines didn't report past food industry ties. The lead researcher, Bradley C. Johnston, said he was not required to report his past relationship with a powerful industry trade group. I don't know what that trade group is, but if you scroll down...
Well, you can't scroll down.
What does it say, Jamie? It's a slide.
I can tell you, in the first one, the sugar one, it was that Pepsi and all this stuff. Although they make a non-profit with a fancy-sounding name,
right,
and then they back it all with industry funding. Same with the meat study. That's why I don't understand why he'd use it. If you were being objective, like you're saying, oh, there's the other studies, but why name this one as though it's got validity? Because for example,
you feel like they concocted this study and released it right before your film specifically to try to take some of the wind out of the sails?
I think it's likely that it was tied into the film, but it doesn't matter whether it is. I'm showing that to present that study as evidence when the consensus of the scientific researchers is against that study, that is calling for an investigation, that has asked for it to be retracted. The co-author of the paper, who's part of the leadership team at Nutrirex. He's the Vance Chancellor of Dean and Agriculture and Life Sciences at Texas A&M, right? Texas A&M is partnered with the Beef Checkoff program, right? And as part of NEWS. And this is also discussed in the New York Times, slide 94. And it goes a lot deeper than that. It actually goes back to Brazilian government. But
let's see slide 94.
Slide 94 is just talking about...
Research group that discounted risks of red meat has ties to program partly backed by beef industry.
So that's it. Those were some of my thoughts about the Game Changers debate. Enjoyed it a lot. And I just want to say that recently Dolph Lundgren, Drago himself from Rocky, has now gone vegan. So yeah, maybe I will tell my kids that this was Rocky versus Drago.
Curious, because you're looking fantastic, Nick.
Well, thank you.
What is the secret of staying fantastic?
Actually, I've been vegan for a month.
Really?
I'm trying it, yeah.
What?
Do you like it?
I love
Ivan
it.
Drago's a vegan.
You've heard the rumours about vegans.
No, you know, actually, a friend of mine, Arnold Schwarzenegger, he produced this documentary called Game Changers about plant-based diet and athletes. So I checked it out, and then I figured I'd try it out.
And a lot of people are choosing to eat a plant-based diet after watching this film, including Santa Claus himself is going vegan for Christmas this year, according to some of my sources out there. I was very happy to see James come on to the Joe Rogan podcast, and I was happy that Joe was open-minded and allowed James to come on and to talk about the Game Changers film and respond to some of the arguments that Chris made in the first place. Let me know what you guys think about this debate down below, and subscribe to my channel to watch more videos about plant-based nutrition as well as living the vegan lifestyle. Thank you guys so much for watching. We'll see you in the next video. Peace.
What I'm saying is you are not in alignment with the scientific consensus, and you claim that we cherry-picked in the film, right? But you handpick studies to back up your bias. Not to mention that we've pointed out that the studies in those meta-analyses, some of them are heavily funded by industry, not saying that you should throw all those out, but you don't have the wherewithal to assess the studies in the meta-analysis because you point out yourself that you can't even read a forest plot. So he reads conclusions, right? He reads conclusions in writing, but has not looked at the actual data.
It's the motherfucking Eagle Double G. Snoop Dogg. You know I'm mobbing with the D.R.